I think we're going to have a very similar 4 years of what the original Trump administration had. I think it's going to be very similar to that. In that sense, I think the Border Patrol agents' morale was high in the sense of they felt like they were doing a job that brought them satisfaction. Like they were doing the work that they're supposed to. The hard part is that the media, in those 4 years of the Trump administration, the media attacked the Border Patrol, and they turned the Border Patrol into the enemy. And
Yeah.
they told people that they were the same as the Nazis, and they were holding concentration camps, and all these concepts. And so, my biggest thing is knowing that I think we should be very. I think the media really has to have a reset on how they approach these conversations because they demonize and scrutinize the Border Patrol career field without educating the people on what the job actually is. And
Yeah.
so, in that sense, those 4 years of the Trump administration might have been good for the agents' morale in the sense where they feel like they're doing the work that they're supposed to or that they were trained to. But the media got a hold of them as well, and that hurt a lot of the agency
It really
as
did.
well as
Yeah.
recruitment. You start having people doubt maybe the career is justified or justifiable, and you have people really questioning, the morality of their career. And I don't think there ever should be a question of what they do. I've done it, and it is really you're spending more time saving lives and safeguarding human life than you are ever in any kind of physical confrontation. And just by the way of numbers and by way of per capita, that agency has more agents being attacked and hurt on a daily basis than any other law enforcement across the nation, and
True.
vice versa has the least amount of engagements of any other law enforcement in the nation. And so when people get the discrepancy of the career field, well, that makes it hard as a career. As these agents kind of turn on the news and hear something bad about themselves. So I really hope that what we're doing here on this show, what my book would be doing, and other people out there who are telling the career field of the Border Patrol, I hope it gives the Border Patrol, the feeling that they have allies now, and they have a voice again.
Yeah. It seems to be going that direction, and you hit it on the head. I getting to work with you guys and knowing the challenges, I liken it to being, you got to be the jack of all trades and you got to be that community oriented policeman in the Wild West. You got to work with people. You're saving, you're nurturing more than, like you said, than ever having those engagements. Very similar to what we use in the Game Warden world do, especially with what it's morphed into. And I hope to see the turn because I have a lot of friends in your agency, you included, and the morale stories I was getting even from the guys up here on the Alberta border that I see
Yes.
every day when I'm in that were sent down there and doing deployments. And now they're back up here going, oh man, we got to talk. I got to just vent. I'm like, what? When you guys were whipping, migrants crossing with whips on your horses. It's like, no, no, you guys got, that whole thing. And right away, I saw how that was being played in the media and how so destructive that could be to,
Yeah.
the woman that just doesn't understand. And I do like the fact that there's already been a big emphasis on getting more of you guys down there.
Yeah.
And that is so critical.
Well,
Yeah,
the hard
represented
part
you
about
guys
that
are.
is we need to find people who want to apply for the job. For so many years, they've demonized the career field so that how many Americans actually feel proud to do the service, right? And so we're hoping that, with efforts that the Border Patrol has put into place, that there's a bigger recruitment for the military.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. I got a very provocative one. I mean, I've had so many interviews in the past 2 months that this continues to pop up, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it.
Oh gosh. All right.
Several,
Send it.
several. I mean, I'll just give you the list. An investigative journalist out of Mexico, a economist, a former um, drug trafficker himself. Multiple people have stated that they believe the only way to win this war on drugs is to legalize drugs.
Well, what I can say is I'll talk about cannabis first.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't matter where I sit on the cannabis continuum personally. I'm not a cannabis user. Um, national regulation for that product that 45 plus million Americans are going to consume, and they're not going to stop consuming it, whether it's regulated, unregulated, in dispensaries, whatever. We know for PTSD, veterans, et cetera, we know there's medicinal benefits to cannabis, and they haven't even been really federally documented because the scheduling hasn't changed. And I do know that if we've always said that if you look at cannabis regulation like Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, like wine, alcohol, and tobacco, and regulate it that way with a uniform standard of quality, of purity, of distribution, of legality, et cetera, you would take most of that cartel money and that activity, I think, out of that faction for our cartel. I don't think we'd be dealing with the weed cartel so much. You'd see it more into the fentanyl and trafficking. On the other drugs, I honestly don't know. I know when it comes to especially the opiates, and you look at this fentanyl thing, and you look at crack, and you look at all these different derivative. Let's take methamphetamine, man, the super meth, the P2P stuff
Yeah.
that's made in these 22-pound dirty labs. That stuff is, I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And so Oregon tried the whole regulation thing with letting the white dope go for a while, and that has become an absolute mess in that because they didn't have the infrastructure to deal with the backlash on that, with whether it was addiction or the crime that followed. Uh, I don't know that I can say it's good or bad. I think if we ever actually look at national legalization of any of those drugs, beyond the cannabis continuum right now, all that has to be looked at, and there has to be a plan in place by how is it going to be monitored, how is it going to be regulated and structured on some level. And no state that's even tried to dabble in it, like Oregon, have even come close to making it happen. So it's not a great answer. I can't say yes or
No,
no
that's
because I
good.
just don't know enough of the rest of it. Where do you sit on it, or from your standpoint, with what you've heard from all of us so far?
Yeah, it's funny, anything that kind of disrupts the cartel's funding is fascinating to me. I'm like, ooh, that sounds like I'd
Once
like
it
to
gets
try that.
attention. Yeah,
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 yeah. So
yeah.
it got my attention, right? And then
Right.
also by the fact of, if we can regulate it, we can control it, we can manage it, then we can also tax it, which means then money goes back into our pockets to our American people. If we can implement some kind of, because once you start doing that, I think it takes away from the idea of like, ooh, this is bad for some people, and it starts to become almost a social norm. And in that sense, not everyone uses drugs, not
Yeah.
everyone becomes an addict, and so in that sense, maybe you remove the power from the cartel and you put it back in our hands. We have to understand, and we have to get down to the bottom of why America is the biggest consumer of the product already in the first place. So once we have to fundamentally figure that out as a country, but as now we have the power to do so with the money to hopefully create other kind of maybe addiction clinics or whatnot, or inpatient therapy. But it's fascinating. The other side of it is, well, the cartels already knows that there's more money in a commodity called human beings, right?
Oh
And
man.
you're
Exactly.
not,
Yes.
and so
Yep.
then if you destroy one thing, dismantle the whole drug, highway, then they're just going to probably double up on human commodity, right? And that becomes a scary thing because we also are the highest consumer of human trafficking, and which becomes even more bonkers.
And it's so crazy that of the leading problems we have with the biggest enemies we face, we're talking about all these crimes the cartels do. They don't do it because we don't facilitate it. We have the biggest demand, like you said, whether it's weed, whether it's fentanyl, whether it's human trafficking, child sex, whatever. And you bring up a very, very good point. Could that take it out of the cartel's hands? And why do we have these addictions anyway? And again, I look at, the big pharma debacle with oxycodone and
Yes.
everything else, and it's not addictive. And now you're starting to see all these documentaries and feature films made about how that went down, and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, well then basically our own corporate pharmaceutical structure has been somewhat, if not very much, complicit in this
Absolutely.
acceptance of a norm, right, brother? So
Right.
you hit it on the head that, and if you're going to take that away, we've already incited this problem. So who do we put it back on to facilitate these legal drugs? And is it going to be structured carefully where we don't have another, big pharma profit driven versus addictive and treatment? And now you're decimating communities because it did become a norm. It has become a lifestyle, especially with the kids, right? That
Yes.
pain pill that comes from big pharma, whatever it may be, and hey, it's got to be good, man. My dad
Well,
takes because he was injured. It's a
yeah.
painkiller
Well,
prescribed by a tier
the
one
other
surgeon.
problem, what we always fail to acknowledge is how alcohol has been legal, and it's one of the
Yes.
biggest killers of our
Yep.
culture, of our time, of even
Yep.
beforehand.
Good
And
point.
that's legal, and that's barely regulated, and it's culturally okay in the Latino community to drink at a young age. You
Yes.
know,
Yeah.
we've indoctrinated that into our culture as if, oh wait, yeah, but that's just drinking, no big deal. This
Yeah.
is weed or this
Yeah.
is cocaine. It's like, wait a minute. You
Whoa,
can
whoa.
be
Time
you
out,
could be
man.
yeah,
Yeah.
you don't necessarily die from an opiate overdose because of the opiate is toxic. You die because of respiratory distress. And so
Right.
it's like, but no, alcohol is toxic, and every time you drink it, you're partly killing yourself, right? There's a toxin in that. So
Yeah.
it's a very
100%.
strange way that we look at all of this.